I thought I knew my life, until I found out my best friend was the father of my kids, my wife was plotting to kill me, and the people I trusted most were my greatest enemies. But this isn't where my story ends, it's where the fight for my future begins. It had been a grueling, year-long investigation, one that tested everyone involved in ways we hadn't imagined. As the lead investigator, I endured countless sleepless nights, poring over evidence and chasing down leads, trying to piece everything together. The trial felt like the final stretch, the conclusion to months of relentless work that had consumed every corner of my life. Those 2 weeks in court were draining, not just physically but emotionally too. Still, I knew the end was in sight. Now, with the jury deliberating, everything was out of my hands, and all I could do was wait. Tensions ran high throughout the trial. For me, this case wasn't just another assignment, it was personal. It dredged up memories I had long tried to forget. The courtroom, thick with tension, slowly unraveled a narrative many had worked hard to bury. When the closing arguments ended, I felt a strange mixture of relief and dread wash over me. The jury had heard it all, and they were dismissed soon after. It was close to 4 p.m. when the judge instructed them to return to their hotel for the weekend. Meanwhile, the defendant was taken back to the Tarrant County Correctional Center, and I knew we wouldn't hear anything new until Monday. Exhausted, I returned to my room at the Hilton Garden Inn in downtown Dallas. On my way, I stopped at a bar to grab a quick beer and something to eat. Halfway through my drink, a familiar voice caught my attention. "Hey, cowboy. Buy a girl a drink?" I turned around and instantly recognized her. "Ashley? Ashley Marks." "Yep, it's me," she said with a warm smile as she walked over. I motioned for her to join me. "Wow, how long has it been?" 17 years, she said, settling into the seat across from me. "Yeah, 17. Ashley had been one of my closest friends back in high school. We were part of a tight-knit group, the Four Musketeers, we used to call ourselves. But everything changed when her family moved to Austin during senior year, and we lost touch after that. "I've been covering the Jenkins trial," she said after a moment. "I saw you testify. I'm really sorry about Jolene. She didn't deserve that." I gave a short nod but stayed silent. There wasn't much to say. She was right, Jolene didn't deserve to die that way. If it were up to me, I'd have preferred something far worse for the one who took her from us. "How are you holding up, Bill?" Ashley asked, concern flickering in her eyes. "As well as you'd expect, considering the last 16 years of my life have been a lie," I muttered bitterly. "At least you've got your kids," she offered gently. "Yeah, legally they're mine," I said with a hollow laugh. "You're their father in every way that matters," she added firmly. I shrugged, taking another sip of my beer. "Doesn't make me feel any better." I exhaled deeply, feeling the weight of everything settle over me. Ashley paused, clearly choosing her next words carefully before speaking again. "Okay, I need to be upfront about something," she began. "Every reporter covering this trial is after your story. But I want to be the one who tells it. Look, I know trust isn't something that comes easy to you right now, especially after everything, but I know you better than any of them. We could even draw up a contract. Nothing goes to print without your full approval. My editors already agreed to it. I just want to make sure this is done the right way." I leaned back, considering her offer. The press had been relentless since day one, reporters cornering me outside the courthouse, waiting in parking lots, hounding me for statements. It was exhausting. But with Ashley, things felt different. There was a history between us, and unlike those strangers, she wasn't just looking for a quick headline. After a moment, I nodded. "All right, Ashley, you've got yourself a deal." Her face lit up with a mix of relief and excitement. "Great. So, where do we start? Do we talk here? Your room? Mine? What's the plan?" I thought about it, but before I could answer, she offered an idea. You know, I've been wanting to visit the old homestead for a while now. It's, what, 2, maybe 2.5 hours west of here. We've got the whole weekend since the jury won't be back until Monday. Why don't we drive out there? You can tell me your story on the way, and once we're there, maybe I can chat with your kids and your parents, if that's okay with you, of course. I hesitated. The thought of taking a break from the intensity of the trial was tempting, and honestly, getting out of the city sounded like a good idea. Plus, Ashley had always wanted to see where I grew up, and this might be the perfect chance. Yeah, okay. That sounds like a plan, I agreed. Where are you staying? The Hilton, just around the corner, she said. You? Same, I replied with a slight grin. Want to grab whatever you need before we head out? She nodded. Give me about 30 minutes to change and pack a few things. Meet me by my truck in the parking lot. You can't miss it, big blue crew cab, I said, smirking. Classic Bill, always the biggest truck around. She laughed. Still driving the biggest thing you can find, huh? Some things never change. By the time we were on the road, the sun was dipping below the horizon, casting the sky in shades of orange and purple. I was glad. It meant I wouldn't have to deal with the glare while driving west on Interstate 20 toward Abilene. Ashley had changed out of her work attire, swapping it for a knee-length denim skirt and a white western blouse. She looked effortlessly stunning, just like she had back in high school. I couldn't help but glance at her a couple of times, and old memories stirred in the back of my mind. She caught my look and grinned knowingly. I can see that look, cowboy. What's running through your head? I chuckled. Oh, nothing. Just thinking about how it feels like high school all over again. Same Ashley, same charm. She laughed softly, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Well, same Bill too. Still the quiet one, always lost in thought. Some things never change, huh? The miles passed quickly as we fell into an easy rhythm, catching up on the years we had lost. And for the first time in a long while, I felt a little of the tension start to ease. You're probably wondering why I didn't end up with you instead of Jolene, huh? I asked with a half smile, trying to lighten the mood. Ashley chuckled, tilting her head as she gave me a knowing look. Oh, is that what you think I'm wondering? I laughed. Well, your reporter instincts are probably kicking in. Nope, it's not my reporter instincts, she said with a mischievous grin. It's the way you're checking out my legs, just like back in school. Thought I wouldn't notice. I leaned back in my seat, smiling at her. What can I say? Legs like those are hard to forget. She grinned and shook her head, then pulled out a small voice recorder from her bag and placed it on the dashboard. So, is there a Mrs. Wright waiting for you back in Austin? She asked teasingly. Nope, I said, glancing over at her. After the divorce, I threw myself into work. Trust issues, you know. Haven't found anyone worth my time since. Sorry to hear that, she said softly, though the playful glint in her eye hadn't disappeared. I doubt you really are, I replied, smirking. She laughed. Okay, maybe not entirely. But hey, shall we get this road show going or what? Yeah, let's do it, I said, turning the key in the ignition as the engine roared to life. Ashley placed the recorder securely on the dash. Mind if I record this? Just want to make sure I get the story right. I gave her a nod. Go ahead. I want you to get it right too. I took a sip of my coffee, gathering my thoughts as we pulled out onto the highway. The road stretched ahead, dimly lit by the fading glow of the sunset behind us. After a few minutes of quiet, I began to speak. Well, you know how it was, after you left, Steve, Jolene, and I got really close. Right after graduation, I proposed to Jolene, and she said yes. Steve and I enlisted in the Marines together and went through boot camp in San Diego. We had this plan, get through training, get stationed somewhere, and then Jolene and I would get married once everything settled down. Ashley listened quietly, nodding along. I could see the reflection of the recorder's small red light flickering on the dash as it captured every word. Things didn't go exactly as planned, I continued. After boot camp, Steve and I were split up. He went into infantry and was sent to Camp Pendleton, while I got into computer electronics and ended up stationed in Quantico, Virginia. About a month later, Steve hurt his knee bad, tore it up pretty good, and got medically discharged. Ashley frowned. Couldn't they have given him a desk job or something? I shook my head. No, that's not how it works. Once you're injured to that extent, they usually just discharge you. You probably noticed his limp when you saw him at the trial. She nodded, taking a moment to absorb what I'd said before asking, so, when did you and Jolene finally get married? It was about 9 months after I got stationed on the West Coast. Brian was born less than a year later, I said, my voice growing quieter. And then, well, a year after that, I got orders to Okinawa for a 12-month tour. Before I left, I made sure Jolene and Brian stayed in the house I inherited from my grandparents. It just made sense since both of our families lived nearby. I paused for a moment, watching the road stretch endlessly in front of us. Ashley didn't interrupt, giving me space to gather my thoughts. When I got back, we moved to Camp Lejeune in North Carolina. Less than 9 months later, Jessica was born. Jolene had a rough pregnancy that time, complications, stress, the whole 9 yards. Afterward, she insisted I get a vasectomy. Said it was safer for her that way, and besides, if we ever wanted more kids, the procedure could be reversed. I let out a breath, feeling the weight of those memories pressing down on me. Looking back now, well, let's just say there are a lot of things I might have done differently if I'd known what was coming. Ashley leaned forward slightly, resting her arms on the dash as she listened intently. Did you ever feel like something was off? I shrugged. At the time, no. I was just a guy trying to do the best he could, serve my country, take care of my family. Life was busy, and I didn't have the luxury of overanalyzing every little thing. I glanced at her. You ever get that feeling though, where everything seems fine on the surface, but somewhere deep down, you know something's not right? She didn't answer immediately, but her expression softened. Yeah, she said quietly, I know that feeling all too well. We drove on in silence for a while after that, the hum of the tires against the road filling the space between us. Outside, the darkening sky stretched endlessly, dotted with the first hints of starlight. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I couldn't help but wonder if I was ready to tell her the full story, if I was ready to relive it all again, this time out loud. Anyway, I said, breaking the silence, I guess you could say that's how it all started. The rest, well, that's where things get complicated. I burned the bed and mattress after she was shot, I admitted, my voice steady but heavy with the weight of memory. I don't blame you, Ashley said softly. I also burned the couch, Steve's recliner, and Jolene's wedding dress, I added with a bitter laugh. Ashley's eyebrows raised in surprise. Wait, Steve had his own recliner at your house? Yep. He was practically a regular, I replied. He'd come over every Sunday after church, sit in that recliner, and hang out like he lived there. The kids even called him Uncle Steve. Jolene pushed for that. It always bothered me, but I never knew why, at least, not back then. Ashley frowned. I can see why it would. Knowing what you know now, it must have stung even more. Yeah. Now, it all makes sense. I took a breath, trying to push back the growing frustration. Hey, I need a coffee refill. How about a pit stop? I suggested, glancing at Ashley. She gave a small nod. Sounds good. I could use a break too. As we pulled into a small roadside diner, the hum of the truck engine faded, leaving only the quiet rustle of the wind outside. The old neon sign flickered above us, casting a dim glow over the gravel lot. We grabbed our drinks, and after a brief pause, Ashley turned to me, her expression more serious now. "You said Jessica sent you a picture of those rings, and cigarette butts?" "Yeah," I replied. "It was my great-grandmother's engagement ring. I'd given it to Jolene when we got engaged." "And those cigarette butts?" "They were Steve's, he was the only one who smoked that brand. The ashtray was sitting on my nightstand, in our bedroom." Ashley's eyes filled with sympathy, glistening slightly as she processed what I was saying. "How could she do that to you? And you say Jessica found them?" I nodded, taking a slow sip of my coffee. "She helped her mom clean the house that day. Part of that cleaning meant emptying the ashtrays. That's when she noticed the rings and figured something was off. She snapped a picture and sent it to me. She was pretty upset." "I can imagine," Ashley said quietly. "Did Jessica say anything to Jolene about it?" "Not that I know of. I told her not to mention it. I didn't want her caught in the middle of it all. I also asked her to take the rings and keep them safe for me." Ashley leaned forward slightly, her expression a mix of curiosity and concern. "So, what did you do after that?" "I knew it was over," I said bluntly. I didn't have solid proof of the affair yet, but I had enough to start digging. The first thing I wanted was DNA tests for the kids. I needed to know if they were really mine. Then, I started setting up surveillance. Motion-activated cameras, audio recorders, even a phone bug. Everything was hooked up to my home server and backed up to the cloud. Her eyes widened slightly. "You set all that up on your own?" "Yeah. I did it while she was out shopping one day. The DNA tests were easy enough. One of our clients in Dallas was a lab that handled them, so I sent in samples from the kids and myself. I didn't want to believe it, but I trailed off, the weight of what came next pressing on me." "The results," Ashley prompted gently. "What did they say?" I glanced at her, then turned my focus back to the road. "Hold on. I need to take this exit." The truck slowed as I carefully maneuvered onto a narrow country road. The sky had darkened completely, and there were no streetlights, no guardrails, nothing but the beam of my headlights cutting through the night. The road was poorly maintained, with sharp turns and uneven patches that could easily send someone into a ditch, or worse. Ashley remained silent, sensing the tension in the air. This wasn't just any road, it was known for being part of Steve's old pill-running routes. Most of his former associates were either locked up or long gone after his arrest, but it still wasn't the kind of place you drove through without being cautious. I clicked on the high beams, turned on the light bar, and flipped on the police scanner I kept mounted on the dash. Static crackled briefly before a low voice came through, reporting nothing out of the ordinary. "You really know how to set the mood," Ashley joked lightly, though I could tell she was uneasy. "Just staying safe," I said. "This area used to be Steve's territory. Even though the Rangers cleaned up most of it, I'm not taking any chances." As if on cue, the radio crackled again, this time with a familiar voice. "All quiet so far. It's been calm since the last sweep. My replacement should be here soon." I picked up the radio, pressing the button to respond. "Thanks, Hank. Stay safe out there." We exchanged quick goodbyes, and as I put the radio back down, Ashley turned toward me. "So, back to what you were saying. The tests. What did you find out?" I took a deep breath, my fingers tightening slightly on the steering wheel. The results were, well, let's just say they confirmed what I already feared. But it wasn't just the DNA that broke me, it was what came after. That's when I found out just how deep the betrayal ran. "I'll start the coffee," I said as we stepped inside. While the coffee pot sputtered to life, I gave Ashley a brief tour of the house. This place was built in 1866 by my ancestor, William Bryan Jennings, right after the Civil War, I explained, leading her through the halls. Over the years, it's been expanded and modernized, but some parts of the original construction are still visible. She admired the craftsmanship, the thick wooden beams, the hand-carved details on the staircase railing. It's incredible that it's still standing, let alone in such great condition. I nodded. 5 bedrooms, a 3-car garage. It's been passed down through generations. Once the tour ended, we returned to the living room. I walked over to a cabinet and pulled out a disc. I've scanned all the documents, and I have pictures and audio files too. Everything's backed up. I picked out the right disc and slid it into the DVD player. Fair warning, it's graphic. Ashley's expression hardened, but she gave me a determined nod. I'm ready. I grabbed the remote and hit play. This video is what confirmed my suspicions. Pay close attention to what they say. On the screen, the footage began. It showed Jolene entering the bedroom with Steve. They kissed, then started undressing. Ashley leaned forward, her jaw tightening as she watched Jolene casually take off her rings and toss them into the ashtray. Steve smirked, pulled out a cigarette, and after taking a drag, stubbed it out directly on the rings. Classy, Ashley muttered under her breath, disgusted. On screen, Steve's voice came through clearly. To hell with him and his great-grandfather's ring. He sneered, blowing out a cloud of smoke. Jolene laughed. A family would just mess up what I've got. Bill works, I get the benefits, and I don't have to worry about a thing. Steve chuckled darkly. And Bill? He's so clueless, we could do it right in front of him, and he wouldn't even notice. Jolene smirked. Can't you handle him like those other guys you dealt with? Steve shrugged. Those were undocumented guys, nobody cared about them. This is different. Bill's a respected man. We can't risk it. He paused before adding, maybe you can arrange an accident, though. People crash on Indian Trail all the time. Jolene seemed to like that idea. Maybe poison him slowly over time. We'll figure it out. Let's wait until the kids are older, so it doesn't mess things up in court. Once the baby is born, the courts won't finalize anything, no matter who the father is. Ashley's eyes widened in shock. They were seriously planning to kill you? Yeah, I said flatly. And Steve knew I might file for divorce. He even had his lawyer order Jolene to report any moves I made. When I confronted Alan, our attorney, about it, he admitted as much. Wait, Ashley said, frowning. He actually ordered her to break attorney-client privilege. I nodded. Yep. Alan didn't even bother denying it. He just said, Bill, I don't like it either, but I'm not about to end up in a shallow grave on Indian Trail. Ashley's mouth opened slightly in disbelief. He really said that? Word for word, I confirmed. At that point, I didn't have a choice. I fired him on the spot and demanded all our files and backups. Ashley leaned back, shaking her head slowly. And then what? I gathered the evidence I needed, DNA results, video recordings, everything. Once I had enough, I showed it to my dad. He knew Steve was trouble, but even he didn't realize how deep it ran. What did he say? Ashley asked. He immediately came up with a plan. He asked about my meetings in Dallas. I told him they were scheduled for the next day. That's when he suggested something bold. Tell Jolene you're going to Phoenix for a few days, he said. I'll come with you, and we'll help pack up the kids. They can stay with us for a while. It might throw Steve off long enough for us to figure out the next step. And did it work? It bought us a little time, I said. But when I mentioned the idea of divorce to my dad, he gave me this cold, hard look and said, if you're thinking about divorce, forget it. Ashley blinked, confused. Why would he say that? He knew Steve's connections, I explained. He figured if I filed for divorce too soon, Steve wouldn't hesitate to make his move. Dad wanted me to wait, to play things smart. Ashley was quiet for a moment, processing everything. Bill, this is insane. I can't believe you went through all of this without anyone knowing. I shrugged, trying to stay composed, though the memories still stirred something raw inside me. I didn't have a choice. It was either stay ahead of them or end up like one of those guys Steve handled. I don't care if you know about us, Steve sneered, his voice dripping with arrogance, but I'm not going to let you drag me through court. Why, Steve? I asked, my frustration boiling over. We were friends. How long has this been going on? With a smirk, he replied, since prom. Remember when you danced with Ashley while Jolene and I snuck off? That's when it started. Then, we picked things up again while you were stationed at Quantico. Jolene got on birth control, but, conveniently skipped it around your wedding. He grinned maliciously. I was your backup. I didn't say a word, I didn't need to. I stopped the recording, burned it onto a DVD, and immediately sent copies to my dad and a few trusted contacts in Dallas. Once that was done, I grabbed my phone and dialed my father. Dad, check your email. We need to act now, Steve just made a threat, and the kids are at risk, I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the rising panic. I understand, Dad replied calmly. I'll make a few calls. You get Brian and Jess to my house. Call the school and let them know that Jolene and Steve aren't allowed near the kids. Without hesitation, I hung up and called the school, making it clear that neither Jolene nor Steve was to pick up my children under any circumstances. Then, I dialed Brian. Brian, listen to me carefully. Get your sister and go straight to Gran's house. Don't stop for anything. Do you understand? Yeah, okay, Dad, he said, his voice laced with confusion but obedient. A few minutes later, Jolene called, her voice frantic and desperate. Bill, it's not what you think. Please, let me explain. Steve was just talking trash. We can work this out. Are you kidding me? I snapped, unable to hold back my anger. You both conspired against me from the very beginning. You denied me my own children and plotted to end my life. And now, Steve's threatening his own kids if I don't fall in line. What kind of people are you? Get your stuff and get out. Now. Jolene stood there, visibly shaken. I had never raised my voice at her before. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but I wasn't interested in hearing any more lies. I grabbed her left hand and yanked off her rings, pocketing my grandmother's engagement ring, the one that actually meant something. I'll be filing for a restraining order, I said coldly. The one that keeps both of you 500 feet away from my family and our property. Now get in your truck and leave. She didn't argue. Jolene turned on her heel, grabbed her things, and hurried out. I followed her to the door and watched as she got into her truck. Just as she pulled out, Steve's vehicle rolled into the driveway. Dad was already outside, his rifle in hand, standing his ground as Steve stepped out. Not another move, Dad warned, not lowering the weapon. You're not welcome here. Steve froze, clearly unused to being confronted like this. Before he could say a word, 2 DPS vehicles with flashing lights pulled in behind him, blocking his truck. 4 officers stepped out, weapons drawn. We'll take it from here, Mr. Jennings, one officer said, approaching Steve. Dad lowered his rifle slowly as the officer handed Steve a restraining order. Steve's smug demeanor evaporated as he took the paper in silence. The officer then turned to Jolene and me. Is that her? He asked, nodding toward Jolene. Yes, I said simply. The officer didn't hesitate. Jolene Jennings, you're under arrest. You'll regret this. Steve fumed. I'll have your badge for this. I stayed silent. I hadn't even mentioned the liquidation plot yet, but it didn't matter, I didn't have all the evidence on me anyway. Part of it was still in the DVD player back at the house. However, my contacts in Dallas had already received enough to get things moving. As the officers began to lead Steve and Jolene away, a news van parked nearby shifted into gear to make room for the patrol cars. Before they could leave, a reporter stepped out and hurried toward me, with Dad close behind. "Mr. Jennings," she called out. "Why was Commissioner Jenkins arrested?" I glanced at Dad, then turned back to the reporter. "Because threatening liquidation is still a crime," I said calmly, "even for politicians like Steve and his girlfriend." The reporter barely had time to ask another question before the officers drove off, leaving nothing but dust and fading red and blue lights in their wake. I exhaled deeply, the weight of everything pressing on my chest. This wasn't over, not by a long shot, but at least, for now, the immediate danger had passed. Dad placed a hand on my shoulder, his voice steady and reassuring. "We'll get through this, son. One step at a time." I nodded, knowing he was right. But in my heart, I also knew that this fight was far from finished. "I'm sorry for what you've been through," the agent said, his tone somber. "We have solid evidence linking Steve Jenkins to pill running, weapons smuggling, human trafficking, and at least 6 targeted killings. Your wife was deeply involved, especially in the trafficking. We wanted more time to build the case, but after Steve's threats against you, we had to move faster than planned." Don Jacobs from the Texas Rangers added grimly, "The sheriff's department has been compromised. We're making arrangements to replace them with Rangers and DPS officers." The weight of their words hung in the air, but before I could fully process it, a paramedic approached me. His expression was grave. "I'm sorry, Mr. Jennings, she's gone." Strangely, I didn't feel much sorrow, just a hollow numbness. It wasn't the kind of grief that breaks you, it was more like relief mixed with exhaustion. I turned to see Steve on another gurney nearby, his left shoulder torn apart by a rifle shot but, unfortunately, still breathing. I walked past him without a word and made my way to Dad and the kids, who stood a little further off, unharmed but visibly shaken. I avoided the pools of blood on the ground as I approached. "What happened?" I asked, keeping my voice low. Dad exhaled deeply, his hand resting protectively on Jessica's shoulder. "We came back to grab a few things from the house, but Steve and Jolene must have made bail because they showed up. Jessica and Jolene started arguing, and then Steve pulled a gun. I had my rifle with me, so I took the shot before he could hurt anyone." I glanced down at the weapon still in his hands. "Good thing you had it." We didn't speak for a moment. The stillness of the night surrounded us, broken only by the distant sounds of sirens and the shuffle of law enforcement handling the scene. Ashley, who had been standing quietly nearby, finally broke the silence. "I'd forgotten how dark and peaceful it is out here," she said softly, glancing around. "City life makes you forget." She hesitated for a second before adding, "Bill, you need closure. If you don't find a way to deal with this, it'll eat you alive." I sighed, rubbing my temples. Easier said than done. How do you move on when the person you loved was lying the whole time? I feel robbed. Robbed of my life. The kids aren't even mine. Ashley placed a gentle hand on my arm. I get it. My husband cheated too. Not everyone's love is real. We stood there in the quiet for a moment before heading back inside. Even with a DPS officer stationed outside, I still felt uneasy, knowing that Steve's associates could still pose a threat. And on top of that, I wasn't entirely sure where things stood with Ashley. She seemed to understand, though, and as we settled in for the night, she teased lightly, "Just don't make it a habit to dwell on things forever, cowboy." That night, for the first time in a long while, I actually slept well. When I woke up, the smell of bacon filled the air. I rubbed my eyes and got out of bed, heading toward the kitchen. "Rise and shine," Ashley called out cheerfully, standing over the stove in a long t-shirt. "Breakfast is ready." I smiled as I walked into the kitchen. She had gone all out: pancakes, bacon, sausage, grits, toast, and eggs. It reminded me of something from a simpler time, back when things didn't feel so complicated. Ashley, standing there in that oversized t-shirt, looked just like she had back in high school. After breakfast, she grabbed her laptop bag and purse, urging me to hurry so we could head over to my parents' house. When we arrived, the kids ran out to greet us, their faces lighting up as they saw me. After quick introductions, I led Ashley inside. She explained her plan to interview everyone privately, hoping to gather details for her story. I agreed, and while she spent time with Jessica and Brian, I sat with Dad in the den. About an hour later, Ashley returned. "Find out anything new?" I asked. She nodded, her expression serious. Jessica mentioned that Steve had been making advances toward her for some time. "That prick," I muttered, clenching my fists. "Your family loves you," Ashley said gently. They had concerns about Jolene, but they didn't interfere because they didn't have solid proof. "Anything else?" I asked, trying to stay calm. "I learned what it feels like to be part of a close family," she said softly. "I really enjoyed spending time with you and the kids." "We enjoyed it too," I said, giving her a grateful smile. Later, as we prepared to leave, Ashley asked quietly, "Did you really cremate her in that dress?" I gave a slow nod. It felt right. We made one last stop before heading back, the cemetery. We visited Jolene's grave, which was marked by a simple, unadorned stone. No flowers, no decorations. Just a name and dates. I stood there for a moment, reflecting on everything that had happened. Ashley stood beside me, silent but supportive. I didn't need to say anything, she understood. For now, I had closure. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. "I see you used her maiden name," Ashley noted quietly, glancing at Jolene's simple gravestone. "She didn't deserve ours," I replied without hesitation. Ashley placed a hand gently on my chest, her eyes searching mine. "You still have a lot of anger, Bill. Have you ever truly mourned her?" The truth was, I hadn't. There was no love left for Jolene, only betrayal and pain. Mourning felt pointless when the person you once loved turned out to be someone you barely recognized. I stayed silent, not wanting to dig deeper into emotions I hadn't figured out myself. Ashley didn't press me further. Instead, she leaned up, kissed me softly, and with a playful smile, turned back toward the gravestone. "Bye, Jolene. Your husband is taking me out on a date." I couldn't help but chuckle as I whispered my own goodbye. "Goodbye, my dear." As we turned to leave, I thought I heard a faint sob carried on the wind. I stopped briefly, glancing back at the gravestone, but it was probably just my mind playing tricks. Without another word, I quickly made my way back to the truck. "You okay?" Ashley asked as she settled into her seat. "Yeah," I replied, starting the engine. "Let's stock up for breakfast and get ready for tonight." We stopped at the local farmer's market and picked up everything we needed: eggs, bread, milk, bacon, and a few other essentials Ashley insisted on. "You spoil me," she teased, leaning close. "You got it, babe," I grinned, steering the truck back toward home. When we arrived, I pulled into the garage and closed the door behind us. Ashley turned to me, her eyes shining with emotion. She leaned in close, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm all yours, if you want me." Her words hung in the air for a moment, filled with warmth and promise. That night unfolded in a way that neither of us could have imagined just a few days ago. Only 36 hours earlier, I had felt broken, like a man left behind by life. But now, Ashley was showing me how to love again, piece by piece. As we lay together afterward, her head resting on my chest, I knew I wanted to take a chance. "Ashley," I began softly. She turned, her eyes meeting mine. "What is it, cowboy?" I reached into the nightstand and pulled out a small velvet box. Her eyes widened as I opened it to reveal a simple but elegant diamond ring. "I don't want to wait any longer," I said, my voice steady but full of emotion. "Ashley, will you marry me?" Tears welled up in her eyes as she smiled. "Yes, Bill. 1,000 times yes." The next morning, we called the kids and my parents to share the news. I put the call on speaker, and Brian's voice erupted with excitement. "Woo-hoo! Way to go, Dad." Jessica's response was just as thrilled. "Congrats, Dad. You got yourself a real winner there." "Congratulations," my dad added warmly. "Welcome to the family, Ashley." "Thank you, Mr. Jennings," Ashley replied, beaming. Dad laughed. "Mr. Jennings was my father. Call me Pop." "Okay, Pop," Ashley said, her smile lighting up the room. "We're so happy for you," my mom added. "Do you have a date in mind yet?" "Not yet," I admitted. "I need to wrap up some things in Austin first." Later that day, Ashley and I made another visit to the cemetery. This time, I carried a small bouquet of flowers. As we approached Jolene's grave, I knelt down and placed the flowers in the vase beside the marker. "By the way, Jolene," I said softly, "Ashley and I are getting married. Just thought you should know." "She's gone, Bill," Ashley said gently, placing a hand on my shoulder. "I know," I replied, standing up. "It just feels good to say it out loud." Ashley gave me a supportive smile, and together, we walked back to the truck. A few weeks later, the trial concluded. The courtroom was silent as the judge read the verdict. In the case of the People vs. Steve Jenkins, the jury finds the defendant guilty on all charges, with the penalty being judicial execution. Steve's gamble had failed. He was convicted of conspiracy, smuggling, human trafficking, and multiple liquidation plots. The jury was polled, each member confirming their agreement with the verdict and sentence. "Mr. Jenkins," the judge said firmly, "this case warrants judicial execution. You are hereby sentenced." Steve remained silent, his smirk gone, replaced by cold resignation. Not long after, Ashley and I had a small wedding in my parents' backyard. Her parents attended, and Brian and Jessica stood proudly as our best man and maid of honor. As we exchanged vows, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister said. "Mr. and Mrs. William Jennings." As we turned to face our family, Brian hugged Ashley tightly. "Welcome to the family, Mom." Tears filled Ashley's eyes as she embraced both kids. "I love you both so much." After the ceremony, my dad handed us an envelope. "Enjoy your honeymoon," he said with a smile. Inside were tickets for a Caribbean cruise. 10 months later, Ashley gave birth to twins, William Frederick and Grace Ann. Life wasn't perfect, but for the first time in a long while, it felt like it was truly mine again.